Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Casey Howard. I am the director at the Chute Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that has been operating in the Flathead Valley since 1999. We are dedicated to suicide prevention awareness, outreach, and safe messaging. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I think there is a tremendous amount of power in showing up right now and for being willing to be a part of the conversation and be a part of the solutions, to educate yourselves, to learn more, to be better. So thank you so much deeply for being here. A couple housekeeping items I want to take care of before I introduce you to Dr. Poland. I'd like to thank our sponsors tonight. So I'd like to thank Kalispell Public Schools for opening their doors to Dr. Poland and to us and for having some really hard conversations. I'd also like to thank Logan Health and Parkside Credit Union and Glacier Bank for their support of bringing Dr. Poland here. You'll notice on the seat in front of you there is a QR code. So when you scan that QR code, you can text questions. We're going to be in the back sorting through those questions, and we will sort of choose the most relevant questions for the whole audience for Dr. Poland to answer at the end of his presentation. Any questions that we don't get to, Dr. Poland will formulate a document, a question-answer document that we will share with you via email or on our website afterwards. So that is how we will do question and answers, that QR code right in front of you. The other thing I think is really important to say is how important self-care is. Suicide is a heavy topic. Many of us have been personally impacted. So I encourage you to take good care of yourself tonight while you're in this space, as you leave here, as you move through the days in front of you. Reach out, talk to one another, stay connected. So Dr. Poland, he's become my friend over the last few years. I saw him speak at the Montana State Suicide Prevention Conference about 4 years ago, and then we welcomed him into the community in 2018, where he did some training similar to what he's doing here this week. This is certainly a more intensive effort on his part, and we're really grateful for him, for all of our partners, for all of our donors who make it happen for us to do things like this. So Dr. Scott Poland is a licensed psychologist. He is a national and internationally recognized expert on school safety, suicide prevention, and crisis intervention, and threat assessment, and parenting in challenging times, which is one of the things we're talking about tonight. He has authored or co-authored 5 books and many chapters on these subjects, and serves as a legal expert in several lawsuits. He's also currently a professor at the College of Psychology and the director of Suicide and Violence Prevention Office at NSU, Florida in Fort Lauderdale. We are so lucky to have him. I'm so appreciative that he was able to get here quickly to help our community heal. So welcome, Dr. Scott Poland.
Thank you very much, Casey, and thank every single one of you for coming out tonight. I hope I can say some things that'll be meaningful and helpful to every single one of you. Your attendance tonight is really telling the young people in your community how much you care about them. You know, the word suicide has already been mentioned tonight. I'm a survivor of my father's suicide. I was 25 when my father died by suicide. Would I give anything to have that last conversation back? Would I give anything to know what I know now and the importance of just talking about it, just asking? Our Surgeon General said 48,000 suicides a year in America. We need to talk about it more. Our homes, our schools, the workplace, and our places of worship. So one message I hope you do carry out tonight is we need to talk about it more. Don't be afraid to ask. When you ask someone, then you know what you need to do to help them. And you know, with the young person, we actually ask, most of the time they're going to give you the absolute truth. And it gives them a chance to unburden themselves, to know they're not alone. They're not the first person to feel this way. and there is help available. So there'll be a lot of discussion tonight about warning signs and help and finding that shared time when your child will truly talk to you. You know, I'm going to give a couple of examples tonight of our children. And by the way, somehow I doubt that I'm the only person in this room that experienced a divorce. But you know what really helped? My ex-wife is a psychologist. We actually made a pact. You don't talk badly about me to our children, and I won't talk badly about you. You know, I did remarry a few years later, and Donna and I are always proud to say all 4 of them are ours. And we know that we're partners forever. I'm partners forever with my ex-wife in raising those 2 children that we had together. But our son Jeremy was 3 years old. We were in the grocery store. I was picking out some bananas. And I hear this little voice say, "Dad, am I the boy you always wanted?" That gave me the opportunity to say, absolutely yes, you are the son I always dreamed about. You know what I want you to do tonight when you go home? Let your children know they're the sons and daughters you always dreamed of having, or they're the grandchildren you always dreamed of having. To be honest with you, my career has been responding to lots of tragedies. Not too far away from me is Parkland, the tragic shooting at Stoneman Douglas. And what was my message to parents countless times? When children are shown unconditional love, they can overcome almost anything. Also, anything I say tonight, it's not based on something that I might know or think I might know about the suicides of the young people right here. It's based on 40 years of this being my passion. And the answers, in all honesty, it died with those young people. Sure, we can talk a little bit about general issues that have to do with the problem of youth suicide, but please know that it's really important that we don't make sweeping conclusions based on what we think we know or we might know about 1 or 2 young people. So Andy, let's go ahead and look at some slides. And there we go. So it's a challenging time. It's a challenging time for so many ways. First of all, let's take the technology. Does anybody remember a time when every telephone had a cord on it? Well, that was the case when I grew up. And by the way, 1 telephone in our house. My mom sat next to that phone my entire adolescence. And if I got a phone call, maybe she'd slightly move like 2 feet. So the world has changed a lot. And actually, all that technology, we could do an entire session tonight on technology. But I want to say to you simply, it's a privilege. It's not a right. And we need to, as adults, pay close attention to the technology that our children are using. And I'm really looking forward to answering those questions, and those that we don't get to tonight, I'll answer them, and they will be posted for you. And that's always really an exciting part for me, to try to answer those questions. Sadly, Kalispell has experienced what's called a suicide point cluster. More youth suicides than we would ever statistically expect in a geographic confined area. And I was reminiscing a bit, and I think this is the 15th time I've gone to a community that's experiencing a point cluster. And there's no absolute answer, but what does it actually take? It takes the entire village, which means the parents, the school officials, the community leaders. It takes foundations like NCF. It takes clergy. It takes law enforcement. It takes mental health. It takes physicians. And students themselves play a really critical role. I'm a big believer in talking with kids about suicide, talking to them individually, a small group, up to about the size we had today, which was about 30 students each of the high schools. And primarily, the whole point was to truly listen to them. And one of the things I asked, I said, what do you need from your parents? And what do you want your teachers to do? What do you want from the adults in your community? And we also started out with taking time, hoping every single student could identify their go-to trusted adult. And those trusted adults, they wanted them to be non-judgmental. They wanted them to listen, not give too much advice. You know what I always learned with our children was when I talked too much, when I asked too many questions, all of a sudden our conversations were over. And Jeremy loved basketball. And I think it's so important that every kid finds something they're good at. I don't care what it is, but just something that's their niche, whether it's art, music, whether it's a sport, whether it's chess, doesn't matter. Just something they're good at. But he knew something. Anytime, day or night, no matter how tired I was, if Jeremy would say, "Dad, will you rebound?" I'd get up off the couch, I'd turn on the lights in the driveway, and all I'm doing is catching the ball when it goes through the basket and I just pass back. Pretty soon he's talking to me, telling me all these things I want to know about because I'm his dad. I would respond with something really insightful based on that doctoral degree in psychology to say, wow. I'm not sure, son. I mean, that's a hard one. What are you thinking? So your kids don't want you to say, do this, do that. They just want you to recognize what they're going through and help me to understand. Because two words I rarely use, I understand. Have you ever had somebody tell you that way too quickly? And you know they don't understand. So I've heard this so often from parents that lost their children after school shootings. They say something like, even the people closest to me say, I should be over that by now. They're tired of hearing me talking about it. We're talking about a life-altering event, and we really need to be there to listen. I'm here to listen anytime you want to talk. And you've got to find that shared time. Maybe it's driving somewhere. Maybe it's getting out in this beautiful countryside. Maybe it's cooking dinner. That time when you can truly focus on your children, even if it's just for a few minutes. You want to make them feel like, sincerely, right now, you are the only person in the world that matters to me. And that finding that time in our busy, busy world is really challenging. So, Andy, could you put that slide back up for a moment? Let's see what I might have forgotten up there. I'm looking forward to, of course, answering those questions. My partner is a retired principal. We did the CAS test. Crisis Action School Toolkit on Suicide for the state of Montana. It was mailed to every single principal in the state a few years ago. I've since done 3 of those projects for the state of Texas. I just finished one for the state of Florida. And it's really a challenge, and what we really want is that every kid graduating from a Montana high school knows what to look for, knows what to do, knows not to keep a secret. And I always say to students something like this. This information about suicide prevention, you might need it next week. You might need it next year at Montana State. You might need it on the first job. You might need it years from now with an elderly neighbor. And if I talk about suicide prevention just for a moment across ages, it's really rare under the age of 10. Sadly, I've had to respond to suicides of kids as young as 9. Elementary staff, and I hear from somebody in a school virtually every day, they're saying more and more 4th and 5th graders are talking about suicide. Do we have to take it seriously? Yes, we have to take it seriously every single time. And suicide, sadly, is the second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 and 34. Then it goes down a little bit, but we have a real problem with suicide, middle-aged men, especially our military, whether they're active duty or whether they're veterans. But you know, the highest suicide rate in our country, that's an old white guy like me, if we have family, health, and financial problems. That reminds me of a call that I got from my brother recently. By the way, it's my rich brother. He has 3 homes. One of those homes is on the west coast of Florida. And last winter he called, and I could tell immediately he was upset. I said, Steve, what's wrong? He said, my neighbor Bob was holding a gun to his head in the parking lot yesterday. I just got here and I was told that. Steve, well, do you know, did anybody rush Bob to an emergency room? No, they didn't. Do you know, does Bob still have his gun available? Well, I actually talked to his wife about that. She said, oh, we couldn't possibly take away Bob's guns. Then my brother said, what difference would that make? Wouldn't he just find another way? Steve, there's actually research at Harvard. They summarized it from all around the world. You remove the lethal means, and there's every chance that that person is still going to be with us. And then my brother talked a little more about Bob, and I learned that Bob suffered from Parkinson's. Then I said, Steve, I have a hypothesis. I'm betting Bob is being treated for his Parkinson's, but not for the accompanying depression. I'm really proud of my brother. He actually went with Bob to the doctor, where Bob shared with his physician his suicidal thoughts and plans. And Bob is now receiving therapy and taking some medication. Bob is still with us, not quite a year later, and he's still doing pretty well. So the intervention of any one person, that is what is absolutely so critical for suicide prevention. And I have a couple of opening thoughts. If we go to the next slide, Andy. Thank you. And when I read of yet another youth suicide, I actually think of it pretty simply. Untreated or undertreated mental illness, often in combination with an adverse childhood experience. But the answers to the suicides of these young people, and by the way, here's a little semantic thing, but I always use the term died by suicide. You tell me my father committed something, I might say you commit a crime, you commit a burglary. And what I really hope this community will do is reach out to the families that lost their children to suicide and realize it's no one thing. No one thing, no one person is ever to blame. In all honesty, it's everyone's fault, yet it is no one's fault. So try not to be looking for answers or spreading rumors or thinking, oh, I understand this or that was present. Just realize, those families are experiencing probably the most complicated grief there is when you lose a loved one to suicide. And just be there for them. Pray for them. Be there to listen, support them. I'm going to be honest, we have difficulty reaching out when there's been a death in a family. Because what we're all worried about, I might say the wrong thing. It might come out not in the best way. But all you need to say is, we care. As a community, we are here for you. That's the message we want to get out to all of the families that lost loved ones to suicide. So, all right, we're going to have a technology check.
Just need to adjust your mic quickly.
Okay, absolutely, Harrison. So, and if we could go to the next slide. Thank you, Andy. So, in the old days, we would really just be the most concerned about the kids at this school, right? But it's like, because of social media, the impact of a youth suicide, let's be honest, it's like taking a rock and throwing it into a pond. That ripple effect is everywhere. It's throughout the entire Flathead Valley. And the research would say something like this. Vulnerable young people, it's like they find each other. You don't really have to have even known the suicide victim. You just know that somebody actually did what you have been thinking about. So we need to make sure that we have broad-based, continuing youth suicide prevention efforts throughout the entire valley, with everybody being alert and everybody knowing the importance of getting a school counselor involved, getting community mental health, getting Logan Hospital involved. All those things are absolutely critical. So essentially, it takes a village. And earlier, I mentioned a lot of the people that need to be a part of this. And if I didn't mention survivor groups, they are also really important. And parents who've lost a child to suicide have said, sometimes when I go to like a general grief group and everybody's going around the table and somebody lost their child to leukemia or to a car accident, and then I say, my son killed himself. Sometimes they don't feel like they're quite in the right place. So connecting suicide survivors with others that have experienced losing a loved one to suicide is really important. So let's look a little bit at the challenging times next, Andy. And I think I've pretty well mentioned a number of these points. And the very next slide, that sadly it's the second leading cause of death for young people over the age of 10. We're never going to have all the answers. We have a little over 2,000 high school students on average die by suicide in America. So if we're going to make a sweeping conclusion, we need to make it based on something that's happened hundreds and hundreds of times. Most youth suicides can be prevented, but not everyone, sadly. And when it happens, we just all got to work harder. We all have to be more comfortable. We got to know what to look for, and we have to be more comfortable talking about this. That part's hard, to really use the word and to say to a young person, are you actually thinking you want to give up? Are you thinking it's hopeless? Are you thinking you want to go to sleep and never wake up? Are you thinking you want to go away and never come back? Or even more directly, are you thinking of suicide? We have to be able to ask those direct questions. And then we're going to know how to get school leaders and school mental health and community mental health involved. So it's very challenging. Let's look at the second slide, Andy, about challenging times. And let's see if there's anything that I've not mentioned. Wow. I read the other day that adolescents might spend as much as 9 hours a day on the internet. And you know what I sometimes hear from moms? They'll say, I know the value of a full value meal. And by the way, that isn't at McDonald's. The full value meal, that's at your house. That's around the kitchen table. Hopefully with free and easy conversation between you and your children. And I know that's harder when kids are going back and forth between two different homes. But I was always saying to Jill, Wednesday night, Jill, I know there's a lot going on in your life, but Wednesday night is dinner at my kitchen table. So we need this free and easy communication. But sometimes moms will say, I know it's important to have that technology-free mealtime, but it's my husband. He won't put down his phone. It's important for all of us to turn off that technology and not let it consume us or certainly consume our children. And by the way, I'm so glad that we have dads here tonight. And I tried to meet a few of them. I met Justin, I met Jeremy, I met Phil. Dads coming tonight, again, it's just saying to children, you are important to me. There's actually some research that talks about dad's involvement in kids' life is actually critical to their success and their well-being. Margaret Mead had an interesting quote. She said, the true measure of a society is, can they teach the men to be good fathers? Our son Jeremy, he now has 8 children. Would somebody please tell him to stop? But I remember my advice with the very first one. Son, you need to set a goal of doing 50% or more of everything. There can be no aspect of childcare that you are not involved in. And I'm proud to tell you that he is really involved in childcare. The last time I visited him in Houston, we met at a park. He showed up. At that time, there were only 7 kids. He's got 1 in diapers. Out of that van, he gets some little contraption for every single kid. He's got all 7 of them by himself for the afternoon. That's what we need. The involvement of dads in their children's life is absolutely critical. So moving on, let's see what else we have here. Most dangerous thing your kids do? It's a telephone in the car. It's the most dangerous thing you do. Here's a phrase for you. Do not be intoxicated. Do you know what kids will say? I mean, I look up every 5 or 10 seconds to see where I'm going. Well, that's really not good enough. And where I used to work in Texas, 120,000 students. That probably seems a little difficult to comprehend. But I was the go-to guy after every crisis, whether I wanted to be or not. You know, I actually started to dread the calls from principals and superintendents in the evening because I knew exactly what I was expected to do the next day. But I went into so many classrooms where kids were devastated because they lost a friend in a car accident. So it's so important that we not be in a hurry to put kids behind the wheel of a car. Make sure they're actually responsible and ready for that. And using Jill for an example, she was a good driver, responsible driver. There were no tickets, no accidents. Do you know what I missed as a dad? We didn't have as much time together because all of a sudden she was driving herself places as opposed to, I was always the one who said, Joe, I don't care how far away your friend lives. Let's go get her. Let's bring her to our house. So Jill and I would have a free and easy conversation on the 40-minute drive in Houston to go get her friends. And on the way back, they were in the back seat. I was so quiet. But I learned so much. So it's really important that we find those times when our children will truly talk to us. And so many things, they are a privilege. They're not a right. So that slide, that same slide, Andy, I think it has the importance of you need to know your kids' passwords. You're paying for the $1,000 phone. You're paying for all of that internet access. And this obviously is the message that probably I need to be sharing with the parents of 7 and 8-year-olds so that they understand all along the way, this is a privilege, it's not a right. And then let me talk about sleep for a moment. Sleep deprivation is very connected to depression and, yes, even suicide. And I was in an auditorium in a suburb of Atlanta, and I said something like this. Parents, tell your children it's 10:30 right now. It's time for you to get in bed because high school starts really early the next morning. Hand me all of your technology. It'll be charged, and I'll hand it back to you in the morning. Well, a mom came up to me, and she said, my daughter's 13. What if one of her friends needed to talk to her at 3 a.m.? She would not be able to reach my daughter. Well, ma'am, I mean, what's wrong with your daughter's friend? If something is so pressing at 3 in the morning, I think they should be talking to their own parents, don't you? And I guess if you have your daughter's phone and you want to answer it at 3 in the morning, well, you certainly could. But you know, I didn't convince her. She walked away believing in today's world, her daughter needed to be available 24/7. If the phone's under the pillow, it wakes them up. There's some literature that estimates that 25% of all adolescent girls in this country purposely wake up in the middle of the night to check to see what might have been posted. So my message to you is take charge of the technology. It needs to be off at night because getting the proper amount of rest, and Casey Howard was absolutely correct in emphasizing self-care. You know, this might be the time when it's the most important in modern history to do things to take care of ourselves. There's been a bit of a misconception. Some people think self-care is selfish. It's not. Self-care is taking care of you so you will be in your best position to be a good partner, a good parent, a good employee. And I might add that I could tell during the pandemic that Donna was getting a little depressed. She couldn't see all those beloved grandchildren. We had a little construction project that kept her busy, but that was done. And it was like, she's starting to get depressed. So I did what a lot of people did. I bought her a puppy. Okay? And you know, I spent more for that puppy, sir, than I've bought cars for less than that. But it really did help. The other thing she discovered, paint by numbers. She orders these paintings, and she got one for me, and I took one look at that and the little fine motor detail, and I said, I don't think so. But that really helps her. It just helps her relax. And if I could say one simple thing, it's that during this difficult time, all of your children, they're looking at you. They're looking to see how upset to be. And the modeling, I came up with a little motto. And by the way, my university estimates, and at first I said, you know, my thing is school violence prevention. My thing is youth suicide prevention. They're like, you can do this. You can talk about the pandemic and coping. And I came up with a little model. CALM, obviously the word is calm. Focus on what we can control, which is our reaction and our choices. Being alert for changes and the needs of the members of our family. Always being available to listen. And also I used that L for limiting the news coverage. And Donna used to like to turn on the news first thing every morning. There were periods where, I just couldn't take it. So I was like, let's just look at our phones for a few minutes and let's take a walk instead of being glued to the television and seeing some of this really upsetting coverage about portable morgues being moved into communities and people that couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones. But what's the M stand for? Management in our homes. Routines were really important, even when it was only virtual learning. Kids getting up, getting dressed, staying in a normal routine. And the M is for modeling. Gandhi had a great quote. He said, what we do speaks so loudly to our children that when we try to talk to them, they can't hear us. So they were watching you to see, were you modeling hope and optimism for the future? And that part is absolutely critical. And the university estimates that via Zoom, I might have reached 100,000 people. And although I like to travel and speak in groups, but nothing, I had 6,100 parents on one single session. So now let's go to the next slide, which is really what protects against youth suicide. And of course, think about that for a moment. And the next slide is actually from the World Health Organization. And this is really, it's about family cohesion and stability. That's why I began with talking about my first wife and I know we're partners forever. All of the little milestones, the graduations, the birth of grandchildren, guess what? Everybody's there and everybody's nice. Isn't that what every kid deserves? So whatever, and did I ever get mad at my ex-wife? Of course I did. But I never told Jill and Jeremy about it. You know what I always remembered? She will always be their mother. And she deserves my respect. And she certainly deserved my financial support until both of them became of age. So it's a matter of stability. It's also, if we put the slide back up again for a moment, Andy, there's several other key points there. Access to mental health care. is absolutely critical. Having been to Montana many times, that's particularly a challenge in rural areas. Maybe the mental health center is going to be quite a distance away. I remember somebody saying to me, well, I'd go to the mental health center except my second cousin is a receptionist. Like everybody would know. Well, in South Florida with 6 million people, you're not going to run into anybody at the mental health center that's a member of your own family. But we've got to figure out a way to make those services available, increase them in our schools, increase them in our community. And then coping and problem solving is up there. So Jeremy was 8. And I said, son, I need to talk to you a little more about the death of your grandfather. He said, I know what happened to him. You already told me he had a heart attack. I'm really sorry I never even met him. Well, Jeremy, there's a little more to his story. I need to hear this from me, never from someone else. Your grandfather did have a heart attack, but he actually shot himself 2 weeks later. The word is suicide. Now that you're 8, maybe you can understand what that word means. And he thinks a minute, and he said, you lied to me. I said, no, I just didn't give you the complete information. I was waiting till I thought developmentally you could understand it. Then he thinks some more, and he looks up and says, Dad, you shouldn't feel guilty. Oh, why is that? Well, your parents weren't both psychologists like mine are. They didn't teach you all the things I know about the importance of feeling good about yourself. Dad, every kid has problems. You just have to know to go to an adult and get help. And you just have to believe whatever comes along, you're going to get through it. It'll be okay. Now, wasn't that sweet that he was trying to alleviate my guilt? But what's the most important point there? He's 8 years old. He believes he's a good person. Isn't that what you want for every single young people in the valley? That they feel unconditionally loved, they have problem-solving skills, and they believe they're a good person. Whatever comes along, they will get through it. I wish I could give you magic dust. I wish I could have sprinkled it over the head of every kid in our groups today at Flathead and Glacier High School. But so much of that comes from the home. That's why I want you to promise me when you go home tonight, give them a hug. Let them know you are the son or the daughter I always dreamed of having. So I gave this talk in Colorado, and before I even left the building, like a mom comes up and she says, my son's in college. I texted him. I told him, you are the son I always dreamed of having. He texted back saying, you're the mom I always dreamed of having. So that's what we need in our families. And it really has to do with that unconditional love. So most of the rest of the things up there on that slide from the World Health Organization, they're pretty straightforward. Places of worship, a wonderful place for connection. And by the way, Center for Disease Control really kind of simplified this. Connections are preventative of suicide. Connections in our places of worship, connections in our schools, our community, and the workplace. Those are critically important. And I want to choose my words tonight really carefully. But removing lethal means. You know what a Houston teenager wrote in her goodbye note to her parents? Why did you leave this? Why did you make this so easy? Why did you leave this gun available to me? And I'm not here tonight to question any adult's right to own a gun. It's just there's responsibility also. If you have any reason to suspect that a young person in your family has a problem with substance abuse, they have some emerging mental illness concerns, maybe they don't understand the finality of death, it's so important that those guns be secured. Guns are involved in 50% of the suicide deaths in America. They're only actually used in 5% of suicide attempts. Rarely does a person get a second chance. So it's about responsibility and securing guns. And I've talked to my own brother about that because his grandson, who lives nearby, is really struggling with depression. And I'm proud to tell you that my brother purchased a gun safe because that grandson comes over to his house multiple times every single week. World Health Organization, the next slide, we already covered the first part of that. Second part is, of course, what are those adverse childhood experiences? What are the things we do not want children to experience? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, living in poverty, living with a mentally ill or substance abusing family member, multiple losses. Those are the things we don't want them to experience. But sadly, a number of your children have experienced multiple losses of friends to suicide. An education for everybody about what to look for, what to do. And here's a really important one. The research says about 70% of the time, the person who died by suicide actually went to see the family physician shortly before they ended their life. I know my father did. So that really means we have to have the medical community that's really alert. There actually was a national recommendation that came out 12 years ago saying every teenager seeing the physician for any reason should be asked some questions about depression and thoughts of suicide. And of course, they need to be asked in a way that they'll answer truthfully. You know, Jill just had a baby not too long ago. And when she went in to see the doctor, just before the visit, I said, Jill, do they ever focus on you as a mom and how you're doing? She said, well, funny you would ask that. A lady came in, barely said hi to me, turned to the computer, and over her shoulder was asking me questions about my mental health. Did she think I was going to tell her anything in the way she was asking those questions? So that part is really important. Let's look at the slide about challenges for the state of Montana. I think you're probably all aware that for decades, highest suicide rates in America are always Alaska, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico. Maybe they flip-flop places, but these are the challenges. And I promised earlier, yes, I would tell you a little bit about what the research actually says about youth suicide. There it is. Mental health concerns, family problems, bullying, substance abuse, psychological distress. But remember, right here, the answers died with those young people. So moving on again, Andy, thank you. So a brief quiz. So you see the entire slide, but the point really being we can help them. We can stop them if we know what to look for and what to do. Most youth suicides are preventable. They're actually ambivalent about suicide. What do I mean by that? 1 minute, my life is a series of never-ending problems. Not getting any better. But a few minutes later, there's a glimmer of hope. Something good happened. The good news here, no young person is suicidal 24/7. And the intervention of any one person can make all the difference in the world. So staying with that person. So let's go back to the next slide, please, Andy. So talking about it, it actually makes everybody safer. But I began with emphasizing it's kind of difficult sometimes to use those words and use direct language, but it's absolutely critical to just ask. I'm pretty sure if I would have asked my father, are you thinking you want to kill yourself? He would have told me yes. Then I would have known what to do. So that's the hard part, getting comfortable talking about this. And our schools, our churches, and our places of worship. And I think the next slide is just emphasizing that you don't have to be an expert to prevent a suicide. So anyone can do this. It's not just those of us with mental health degrees. So going on to the next slide, a few facts about suicide. And I think I've covered a lot of those. First of all, the good news, because bullying is a huge problem, especially as a very significant problem with electronic bullying, which goes a lot to the importance of you paying attention to technology. There's actually an app that I really like that I would encourage your kids to download. It's called Rethink. So what's that app do? When you're about to post something that's hurtful, it recognizes the words and you get this message like, is that really what you want to say? So it gives them a chance to be a little kinder in terms of what they might actually post. And it's hard for them to understand, but once you click that button, it is gone. It is out there. There's like no taking it back. And we hope, and we were concentrating today on talking with kids about kindness and being a little more inclusive. And, you know, I shared something with them. It just came back to me, but about 2 years ago, I went back to one of those high school reunions. And I don't want to tell you how many years ago that was, but I'm getting out of the car, and I overhear one of my classmates, and by the way, I only had 80 kids in my class. One of the classmates said, "Oh, there's Scott Poland. He was so mean." You know, that bothers me a great deal. It's like, it made me reflect a lot on, was I? Why wasn't I more inclusive? Why wasn't I trying to be friends with like everybody instead of just being in my own little clique? But I wish I could go back and be a little bit of a different person and hopefully be kinder to everybody. I think this is a time in America where we need a lot more kindness and compassion. And spirituality and being connected in churches is really important. But I also think we just need a set of values where we're helpful to others, we're friendly, we're respectful, we're kind, we're compassionate, we're empathetic. And that is something that we have to work on really throughout our country. See if there's anything else up there about a few facts. Most of the time, they didn't even leave a note. That's maybe about 30% of the time there was a note. And then we could go on for the next 30 minutes about self-injury. What is that? It's purposeful cutting or burning. Why do kids do that? It actually regulates emotions and it releases endorphins. And they're actually getting comfortable with harming their bodies. And there's a connection between self-injury, and by the way, it works pretty well for a while, but it has diminishing returns. And if a young person is engaging in that behavior, we need to get a mental health treatment because they're getting comfortable harming their body. And if this has gone on for years, if they've used multiple methods, then there's some likelihood that someday they might actually make a suicide attempt. So I want to look at the next slide, which shows you a picture of a young man. Notice that maybe he's a high school senior, right? Notice his head is against the mirror. There's been a breakup. There's been an argument with parents. Things aren't going well. He is looking pretty hopeless. He's worried about failing out of school, not sure he wants to live. So think for just a moment, what would you say to that person? So the next slide is basically saying that you would simply recognize what they're going through. Suicidal individual, they're actually trying to end what they perceive as unendurable pain. That's what's really the issue. They don't see a way out. It's tunnel vision, it's constriction. And we need to recognize they're overwhelmed with pain and there is help available. I will be there for you. And I want to be honest, sometimes we have a tendency to be dismissive. Oh, you'd never do that. I know you wouldn't. Or we want to give them a little pep talk. And we have a tendency to share with them a difficult time for us. And we really should avoid that. Like, I might want to say, when I was 14, Doris Nelson broke up with me. We're not talking about me right now. By the way, Doris started dating a senior. She married him. Okay? And I bet she is still sorry. And I cannot even find Doris Nelson on Facebook. My attempt at a little humor tonight, but the most important part, don't be dismissive. Be a good listener. Simply be there for them. So, Andy, let's skip the next slide in the interest of time and go to the one that says, what causes suicide? So, there's no single answer to this. We've talked about at the foundation, untreated or undertreated mental illness, adverse childhood experiences. Young people have actually thought about this for a while. Something causes them to act. It's called a precipitating event. Most commonly, it's a severe argument with the parent. It's a breakup of a relationship, maybe an extreme humiliation or disappointment, maybe a severe discipline problem, or maybe even an issue that might involve the local police. So we need to be alert to those possible precipitating events. So let's go on to the warning signs of suicide. These are pretty straightforward. Probably you know most of these. Giving away prized possessions, making out a will, dramatic changes in behavior, preoccupation with death. I was just reading today an article that said about 25% of the time, the young person who died by suicide was researching suicide online. So that should be a pretty big warning sign for us. They're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed with pressure. I think I could argue pretty convincingly this might be the most difficult time in America to be a kid. We've got a pandemic going on. We've had a lot of pressure on kids. When I graduated from high school, I could go to any state university I wanted. My grade didn't even matter. That's not quite the way it is today. And then, there's a message that I like to give to young people is like, it may not go perfectly at first. I'll share my own example. I got kicked out of the University of Kansas for poor scholarship. All I can tell you is I wasn't ready for college. I'd have been a really bad accountant. It took me a while, but maybe I turned out okay. And the message for kids needs to be, it's not going to go perfectly for everybody. Some of them might need to stay home a little longer. Some of them might actually need to get a job and work first, and then maybe take more advantage of the opportunity to go to college, for example. So next slide has to do with children and tips for helping them in traumatic situations. So we've covered a lot of these, but I think it's important that I share with you the typical reactions children have to a tragedy. They regress academically. They have concentration problems. They regress behaviorally. Younger kids might start having toileting accidents. Elementary kids might become a little more difficult and be fighting with siblings. And high school kids might be withdrawing from others. They have sleeping problems, nightmares, and worry about the future. Let's call him Tom. Tom, unfortunately, found his sister dead in her room. Let's pick it up the next morning. I'm meeting with Tom's parents, and they said, he asked us for a nightlight last night. We told him, absolutely not. You're 15 years old. You don't need a nightlight. Mom and Dad, he found his sister dead. Let him have a nightlight. Some behavioral regression is to be expected. Now let's pick it up 5 weeks later. All of Tom's teachers are sitting around the conference table at the high school. And one at a time they go, he's failing my class. He's like failing every class. They're like, Oh, I don't know, but he's just failing every class. They're getting ready to leave. I'm the one person saying, wait a minute. Don't you remember what happened? He lost his sister 5 weeks ago. Can't we do something besides fail him in every class? We need patience. We need structure. We need tolerance. We need love. We need to understand those are typical reactions. They're not unusual. Virtually every kid is going to have some behavioral and academic regression, some sleeping issues, and some worries about the future. So we do need to be very patient and structured. So a few more parent recommendations, and please be thinking about those questions. Maybe some of you have already texted those in. So I was in a big auditorium in Jordan, Utah, and I said, don't let technology steal your kid. Like somebody jumped up and said, it already has. Okay. So that's why I'm going to emphasize with those of you who have small children, try to be very deliberate and careful. And by the way, if you ever want an answer about what's appropriate for a particular age level, commonsensemedia.org. They're going to tell you how much time with technology is appropriate to various ages, what television programs, what movies. So there actually is some information out there to help us. And the other thought I have, especially about adolescents, is don't set their room up to be like a little kingdom. So if your adolescent has every communication device known to man in their room, why are they coming out? Okay? Mom made dinner, but watch your kid try to pick up that plate of food and go back to the room with it. So you need to insist on sometimes when the family is all together. Maybe even a technology-free night. Get out a board game. Everybody turn off the technology. Just do something together as a family. And you're also lucky about the incredible wilderness that is all around you. So I know Micah takes his family rafting. Last year it was an entire week together. And there was no technology out there. So finding those times when you basically turn all that technology off, even if it's just for a few hours. And then, not enough in today's world to know your kids' friends. You got to know your kids' friends' parents. You have to be the one that demands to know what's going on. And you know, in many ways, I think your children actually want you to do that. It just shows you care because you're going to ask for a lot of information. And maybe you're actually going to go check and make sure they're actually where they are supposed to be because you care about them and you love them so much. Sometimes the slide shows there is a gap between what you think's going on in your child's life and the reality of what they're actually doing. And whatever you need to do so you actually have good information about what really goes on in their life. This next recommendation slide, I pretty well covered a lot of it, but we don't want to put kids in the middle of divorces and separations. Let them know, yes, they are the sons and daughters you always wanted. Your children need to be your priority. And I'm sure that is the case for everybody who's here tonight. But we need every parent in the entire valley to make their children their priority. And we need to be really clear about what the expectations are. Guess what? Every single kid makes mistakes. That's how we learn from those mistakes. And we have a tendency sometimes to want to protect them from consequences. They need to experience consequences. They learn from them. But your love for them should never be in question. That was a really poor choice. And yes, there will be a consequence. But my love for you is never going to change. And by the way, working in schools all those years and talking to school personnel virtually every single day, you know what I think about people that work in schools? They love and care for your children. And if they're telling you there's a bit of a problem, don't be defensive. Just work with them. We need a collaboration between KPS staff members and parents, all working together to help children. This next slide I've pretty well covered about fathers. And by the way, every dad who's here tonight, I'd love to give each of you a high five. Thank you for coming, because dad's involvement is really critical. And I know that can be difficult, especially when maybe dad has moved away. Person absolutely the closest to me, her dad left when she was only 8 years old. Dad never called. Dad never remembered a birthday. 40 years later, he wants to make nice. You know, when he walked into the room, I actually wanted to say a lot to him, but I didn't. And my wife was very gracious. But is there anything that makes up for dad took a hike and didn't try to contact you for 40 years? So we want that never to happen again for any other kid in this world. So dads, whatever the circumstances, must stay involved. And the next slide talks about, yes, there is a relationship between bullying and suicide. There's a strong association. Bullying doesn't cause suicide, but it certainly can contribute when there's already some underlying mental health issues. And so we got to talk to all of our children about being kind to everyone. And I'd be remiss tonight not to emphasize that, in particular, LGBTQ young people in America, they experience more bullying and harassment. They attempt suicide and die by suicide much more often than their heterosexual peers. My friend Michael, he's a teacher. He's a great partner to Ben. He's a great human being. You know what Michael said to me? Scott, when I came out 22 years ago, my dad said, Michael, you are dead to me. His dad hasn't spoken to him in 22 years. I just told you he was a great partner, a great teacher, a great human being. How do we stop that from happening in some of our families? And I don't have the answer. But this is truly a time in America to be respectful of everybody. Gandhi had another great quote. I'm not sure I can get it quite right, but it went something like this. Our challenge is to find both the beauty and the unity in diversity. I believe that has been the greatest challenge for the last several years, to find that beauty and unity in all of the diversity in our country. So these next couple of slides, we're going to go through them rather quickly, but I think with regards to children and depression, and so conversation sometimes goes like this. Dad says, how do I know she's really depressed? I mean, come on, she's a teenager. They're irritable, right? They're moody. I mean, she's kind of withdrawing from the family, but, you know, I think she's just preparing us for, she's going out of state to college next year. Well, Mom and Dad, let me ask you a couple questions. Is this persistent? Has this gone on for 2 or 3 weeks or more? Yes, it has. Is it pervasive? Is it affecting home, school, peers, pretty much everything? Yes. Did she drop out of what was previously a really pleasurable activity? Yes. She was on the dance team for years. I couldn't believe it when this year she said, I don't care about dance anymore. You've got a depressed daughter. Don't hesitate to get her professional help. The literature says this. 20% of all adolescents suffer from depression at some point during those tumultuous years. But then it says about 80% of them get no treatment whatsoever. So we got to figure out in the Valley, how do we make more mental health treatment available to young people? And this next slide, depression is treatable. There's evidence-based treatments for all of these. And these are the things right here to be looking for. So Andy, if you'd go on to depression is treatable. There you see a combination of talk therapy and medication is often what is the most helpful. Let's go to tips for parents. Don't be afraid to talk to your children about suicide. Understand these thoughts are situational. Suicides can be prevented. Know the risk factors. Don't hesitate to get help for your child. Next slide is about turning to the school for help, starting with school counselors who are going to be familiar with mental health resources in our community. And everyone plays a role. This next slide has to do with resiliency. I might argue it's the most important word in all of psychology today. It's the ability to bounce back from adversity. And what are the keys to being resilient? Being surrounded by loving and caring family and friends. Being comfortable venting and sharing strong emotions. Having those problem-solving skills. Always being optimistic about the future. The very next slide is from the Carnegie Foundation. They actually weighed in on what kids need for success in today's world. Notice it says 3 or more significant adults besides their parents. Most of us have concluded that's quite a challenge. Maybe we just need one. Maybe mom just moved here. Oh, she's got a soccer game this weekend. The 9-year-old girl. Who's going to show up? Is the teacher going to go? Somebody from the church going to go? Is the retired guy next door going to go? Maybe he's singing in the choir this weekend. The 10-year-old brother. Like, who is going to show up? That's really important. And that showing up just says, you are important to me. And then every kid needs a sense of safety and security in their home, their school, and their community. That is critically important. Then there's the organized activities. I want to give you 2 examples of that. First of all, I worked in an elementary school for 24 straight years. I outlasted everybody there but one of the administrative assistants. But Leroy, who was the kid I counseled regularly, comes in one day and he says, Dr. Poland, you know, I just want to play Little League Baseball. Leroy, I think I know where those forms are. We're going to get those. We're going to sign you up. He says, you don't understand. My mom doesn't have $70. Even if she did, our daddy left us. My mom works until 7 o'clock every night. So Leroy could never get to a practice. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have a private school on our campus, and to be honest, it's very, very expensive, and it's got every possible activity you could ever imagine. By the way, there's a teacher's aide in every single classroom. You want to play hockey? We got it for them in South Florida. You want to do crew? We got it. You're interested in fencing? The university school has it. But what's I mention, or what's my message to the parents of those children? It's a pretty simple one. Ask your kid to pick one activity a season. Don't you want your kid's life to revolve around their family? Because the school team, the club team, they conflict. The community play, the school play, they conflict. The activities cause stress. So how about one activity a season? And then volunteer work. You know, when adolescents actually volunteered, you know what they learned? Guess what? The world does not revolve around you. That little upset you had with your 14-year-old friend, when you actually volunteer and see how much some people are struggling, you can kind of put that in perspective. Perhaps the only way an adolescent can truly find themselves is through service to other people. And volunteering during the pandemic has obviously been restricted, but just know that's one of the most valuable things your children can do. Put on something at the retirement center. Tutor a younger child. Do something that makes you feel like you make a difference. And that was something out of the high school students today. It's going to take a while, but they want to do something to make a difference. And the community needs to guide them in terms of how to make a difference for suicide prevention. Oh, next slide, please. So, all right, that's me. 47 years ago. By the way, I'd love to have all that hair back, okay? Rodney never knew his dad. His mom tried. She was on welfare. I signed up to be Rodney's big brother. He was 13. I've been there for Rodney. The next slide will show you Rodney and me 47 years later. Now, big brothers, and I saw the sign downtown. You've got big brothers and big sisters. Do you know there's typically a waiting list to get a big brother of about 4 years? You sign up when you're 10 and they don't call until you're 14. You don't care about it so much anymore. Big sisters, more like a 4-month wait list. What am I proud to tell you about Jill? She's known Rodney her entire life. As soon as she graduated from college, she's a big sister to Anna, a 12-year-old girl in Houston. We got to step forward and get involved in the lives of young people. And certainly big brothers and big sisters is a way to do that. In conclusion, as you're thinking about those questions, let's look at my last slide. Take charge of 4 cabinets in your home. Medical cabinet, liquor cabinet. What did I say to our 4 children? The law says 21. I will not condone it. I will not look the other way. And I certainly will never provide it. And for Joe and Jeremy, I said to them, in my humble opinion, all 4 of your grandparents were alcoholics. It seems like alcoholism runs in our family. Is the Poland family the only one with the problem with alcoholism? So I was encouraging them not to drink at all. We've already talked about the internet cabinet. We've already talked about the gun cabinet. Take charge of those in your home. And remember, you are the parent. That is critically important. You control a lot of things your children want. And make sure your children are doing the right things by being involved and being present in their lives. And Andy, if I could have that slide back up, there's a couple of other points there. Everybody must work together to stop these youth suicides. Please reach out to the families that lost their children to suicide. Just let them know you care. You are there for them. And ask, how could I be of help? I can't imagine how difficult this is for you. And then I want to thank both Kalispell Schools and the Chute Foundation. And I hope in some small way I've said some things that will be helpful to you. And by the way, I'm not hard to get a hold of. That's my email. And I do my best to answer every email I might receive. So let's see if we have some questions that I think we're putting them up here on the Whoa, okay. I've heard, okay. There we go. All right. So, to be honest, we heard some of that today. So, let me address the last part of that for you. Assemblies are not recommended. You're wondering why. And an assembly, lots of kids are not going to ask a question. We're not going to get a read on how they are experiencing this. Somebody is upset and went out a door, we don't know who they are. Do we need to talk about this more? Yes. In our homes, our places of worship, and in our classrooms. But being really fair to teachers, most of the time, they didn't really get any training to lead a discussion about suicide. I get to talk to them on Wednesday, and I look forward to that. But they're afraid that they might not say the right thing. So please know we're working on that, and it is really important. Like today, we put the desks in a circle. We sat down because it was all about listening. And that's what we need to do in our classrooms when really traumatic things happen. So just know that KPS is working on that, okay? So let me answer that again about, and there's what's called After a Suicide Toolkit for Schools. It's put out by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center. I was one of the main developers in that. Page 30, you're going to find, don't hold an assembly. And it's also best not to have a grieving parent talk to children about suicide prevention. Trained teachers and mental health professionals talk to children about suicide prevention. By the way, do you know who actually drives suicide prevention in this country? That would be us survivors. But it takes quite a while before you're ready to actually talk to young people about it. Because, I mentioned my father tonight, but I didn't go into great detail. And that's, unfortunately, that's the tendency of a survivor. One lady locally, she's a great lady. You know what she likes to do? Read everybody the poems that she wrote for her beloved daughter. But see, everything is about prevention. So let's see what else we have. The message I'm hearing is love your kids. Yes, I do believe the kids that died, they were loved. And by the way, remember in the beginning I said, everything I'm sharing with you is based on 40 years of working on this. And by the way, I am still learning. And we need to be very supportive of those families. And to be honest, I suspect many of you are really scared because when you know a kid was in a good family, you know they were loved, and there was always something, but we're never going to actually know what that was. What is your message to those parents so they don't feel at fault? I want to be honest in saying that I don't know if anybody could ever give them the words that they need, because everybody has these if-only thoughts. And sometimes they choose to get really active in raising awareness of suicide. I could certainly tell them that obviously we have something in common. I lost a loved one to suicide too. But I remember a kid one time in a classroom in Liberty, Texas. He raised his hand and said, I should have called her last night. If I'd have called her last night, I bet she wouldn't have killed herself. Oh, did you call her often? No, I'd never called her. Did you have her phone number? No, I didn't, but I should have had it. So everybody has these if-only thoughts, and obviously these parents and the siblings do. And being with other people that lost loved ones to suicide, that will help them. But I've also had parents say, nobody can hurt the way I hurt. Well, I think if you just go be with other parents that lost a child to suicide, you'll find some comfort and you're not alone. So I wish I had the answer. It's just be there for them. So what else? Do we have other questions? Okay. So great question. It really has to do. So what did we say in that after a suicide toolkit for schools? Something that I've shared with Superintendent Hill. Prohibiting all memorials is quite problematic. What we really need to do is talk with kids, doing some simple, some transient things. Like I worked with the school district in St. Louis. 9,000 people signed a petition saying, allow a chair at graduation. My thought, first of all, have a policy, treat all the deaths the same, regardless of cause of death, regardless of popularity, regardless of socioeconomics. So just know that kids want to do some things. And having a chair at a 2-hour graduation ceremony, that's transient. Putting a permanent memorial up at school, that is something different. So just know that they are in the community and the schools. They're dealing with all those issues. But the reality is, every kid in the valley knows about these suicides. And yes, we need to be careful not to go overboard, but a few simple things that allow kids to express their emotions. Like in one case, at the high school where I was helping them, kids arrived at the school with t-shirts. So 10 kids have t-shirts. Princess Leia, there's her picture, remembered forever. So the principal's first thought was send them all home. I said, let me talk to them. This is how they're expressing their emotions today. Let them wear these shirts today. Tomorrow, it's important they understand of wearing normal dress. But let's talk to them and guide them towards what can we all do to raise suicide awareness and raise funding. I didn't get here in time, but I would have loved to have been at the Out of Darkness walk. I would hope that maybe many of you were there. That's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. It raises funds for mental health service and suicide prevention. Let's see what else we have. Okay. So we actually had kids today discuss this. And, earlier I said, I understand some of you are scared. And the tendency would be hold them close, right? Some of the things you normally would let them do, you're not so sure now, right? So really what they said today was they want you to be available. They want you to actually share with them some of your vulnerabilities. But they want to be able to initiate some of those conversations. And they don't want you hovering around every moment. So it's like, try to use the parenting style you used a few months ago, maybe with just a little more involvement and hovering, but it's like they don't want you with them every moment. They want you to basically trust them that they're going to get through this. And that should be a message for you and your entire family and the community, which is we are going to get through this. In the hallway to my office, I walk by this poster every day. It says, life is a struggle, but there will be a future. And that's an important thing for the entire community to realize. We will get these suicides stopped. There will be a future. So let's see, Andy, what else do we have? Okay, wow. This is a complicated one. Certainly, religion is a very important protective factor. And I want everybody to be embraced, regardless of their race, regardless of culture, regardless of their sexual orientation. And I think that as a therapist, you are the one that lives in this community and helping kids find that place where they feel embraced. That's really important. And maybe it's not going to be in a place of worship. Maybe it will be in other locations, but to truly feel embraced in love for the person they are. So, let's see what else we have. What would I spend 20 million on? What moves the needle the most when it comes to suicide prevention? Wow. Okay. So, across the country, we simply don't have enough mental health professionals in schools. What I'm about to say to you, I worked full-time in schools for 26 years. I trained school psychologists. I trained school counselors. I talked to them somewhere virtually every single day. So let me just pick on the state of Florida for a moment. So what did our legislature learn after the Stoneman-Douglas tragedy? To meet the recommended ratios of mental health professionals in the Florida schools, social workers need to be increased 10 times. School counselors doubled. School psychologists increased 4 times. Do you know what counselors all over the country say to me? A lot of my time is clerical scheduling and testing. And school psychologists, and I was the president of that national association, for the most part, they're consumed by special education assessments. So clearly, I would like schools to have more personnel. I would like the community to have very low cost or free mental health services for young people. That's essentially where I would put the bulk of that money. The other thing I really loved and enjoyed, adventure-based counseling. I actually raised the money and I built 3 ropes courses. I ran that program. In 14 years, 100,000 staff or students participated. Went out in the woods. There was low elements that worked on problem solving and communication. There were high elements that if you chose to do those, they worked on trust and self-esteem. So I'd put the money into school mental health, community mental health, and I'd build a ropes course. That's what I would do. And I still miss that. That's the one thing about my previous job. I really miss it. So, finding different ways to reach kids. Sometimes we can all sit around a conference table and it'll go pretty good. But other kids, they need to be outdoors. They need to be doing something. Then we all sit on tree stumps and I ask, how do you guys think you did with that challenge? Who was your leader? Did everybody listen? What could you take with you? Because these challenges are going to get a little more difficult. And then at the end of the day, I would always ask, what could you take back to the school? Because out here today, you were all so engaged. You were so positive and encouraging to each other. We need to do that every day in our schools. Be positive and encouraging to everybody. So let's see, Andy, we might have time for a couple more questions. So, you know what I really hope? Somebody that can afford it would give your community $20 million. That's what I really hope. So, gosh, I'd love to meet the guy's wife. He founded Amazon, right? They divorced. She has millions of dollars for philanthropy. I'd love to meet her. And by the way, not too long ago, I gave a talk at our business school. Our business school is named for Wayne Huizinga, the only guy that founded 3 500 Fortune companies. And the dean, You know, before I was introduced to talk about suicide prevention, he said, yeah, I had lunch with Wayne Huizinga the other day, and he said, let me just write you out a check. I'm sure you need something at the business school, and the check was for $1 million. So when I got a chance to talk, I said, Dean Fields, can you get me a lunch with Wayne Huizinga? I want to talk to him about what he could do for suicide prevention. Okay, let's see. Do we have any other questions? What about anxiety? Okay. Casey, come on out.
I just think we can keep talking, but I also want to honor
Okay.
time. So there are a lot more questions. There are a lot of people online, so we can keep going if you want to, and if you want to.
So here's what I think would actually be best. You have children at home that are waiting for you. Remember? I want you to go home and say, yes, you're the son or the daughter I always dreamed of. So I think the best thing in the interest of time and families would be that we do stop. But I'm going to answer every one of these questions. I'm really a terrible typist, but I dictate well, and then I'm going to go back and make it sound nice before we ever post it. So know that it may take me a few days, but I'll be answering these questions. But your attendance tonight, what it says is that you want to make a difference. There was another great quote. Be the difference you wish in this world. That's what we need for the entire community coming together at this difficult time. So thank you for being here tonight. So have a good rest of the evening. I'm gonna go say goodbye.